Hello, dear friends. Welcome to the 10 Laws podcast with East Forest. I am that guy, the forester of the eastern side of the seaboard. This week, I have something a little different for you that I know you're going to enjoy. It's a conversation with John Payne. Now, Kim is an Australian who has worked for many, many years as a counselor, consultant, researcher about education and raising kids and well, you know what, children and adults, because he's helped families and all sorts of people deal with these issues about development. And this was interesting to me because I've stepped into the role of what I like to call part-time stepdad, PTSD. And being a PTSD, this is all new to me. It's like teaching an old dog new tricks. And I've actually become quite fascinated with how I can do better. And I'm realizing it's such an edge of mine as a person as I'm stepping into the role of working with Radha's two kids who are 16 and 8. So very different developmental stages. And I'm running into kids sort of like I experienced when I had a dog. They're a mirror to me. They're a mirror to what's going on with me and what gets kind of triggered inside myself. And I didn't have a lot of experience with this. I've hung out with my nieces and nephews, and you can drop in and be the fun uncle. But when you're sort of living it day in and day out, then you have to be in that role of discipline, in a sense of saying no sometimes, because that's what's being called for, and then that's not fun. You can't just be the fun guy anymore. It gets real tricky real quick. And what I've realized is that this is a real spiritual edge for me. It's one where I'm finding it's such a rich, fertile ground for my own growth as a soul and as a person. And this happens to be the substrate and the mechanism that it's coming forth in this moment. So, like a lot of things in our lives, our relationships are one that is one of the main grist for the mill for spiritual work. And so my relationships have increased in the sense that now I have these other smaller developmental beings who I'm part of their life, and they're part of my life. So I was interested in talking to Kim and asking some questions that relate to me, but through the conversation, I realized that it's sort of a universal things we're talking about. Even if you don't have kids and you're not in that role as a parent, in some ways, we're all parenting ourselves in the sense that I often feel there's this 10-year-old child inside all of us. Underneath the different layers of our adulthood, deep down, there's like this 10-year-old kid or something. I think at around that age is definitely still there. Like that part of you remains. And like when Ram Dass talks about loving your dark thoughts, right? I often use the metaphor that, yes, it's like you would work with a small child. You wouldn't say push them away or, hey, you need to turn off those thoughts, or you need to turn off that bad mood. You have no choice but to just hold them and love them and wait it out in a way and say, it's okay, this will pass, and I'm going to be here. I'm going to be the rock for you in a way. And that's what we often need to do for ourselves. It's a calling for our internal process. So that's why I think for all the listeners out there, whether you have kids or not, there's some saliency in this conversation for all of us. And I think that you will enjoy it. Now, I also want to say that the podcast I've been putting out, I obviously care a lot about audio fidelity, meaning the quality of the audio of all things, but certainly because I'm a musician and a producer, it's important to me for the podcast too. But I'm also committed to speaking with anyone anytime I can. So often, as you've found, my conversations are done remotely. I do this over the internet with people because that's kind of the only way to get it done. And it's more important to me that we have the ability to have the conversation and share it with our larger community, as opposed to saying, I'm going to wait until we can cross paths in person, which would drastically reduce my ability to even do this podcast as on the side for free. So that being said, I personally recognize that the fidelity is not always great, whether we're doing this on Zoom or Skype, and that's frustrating for me. And I've been trying different methods, different basically forms of podcasting technology in order to have better sound quality, but they've often been failing for all sorts of different reasons, whether it's internet bandwidth or technical complications on the participant side or all sorts of things. It's been very frustrating. So I just want you to know that I've been continuing to research that, and I'm going to continue to try different things. I've thought of everything from mailing someone a recorder and a mic and they mail it back to just different, there's all sorts of things popping up there that I could use. And I'm going to try them and continue to, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But thanks for your patience. And this is a podcast like many of them I did on Zoom. And I have lots of fancy plugins and tools to clean it up and make it sound audible. And our ears adjust very quickly. And I'm just letting you know that probably a lot of you don't even care. But to me, this is like my own therapy about sound. It's like I care, and I want to honor these guests in the best way and feature them as best as I can. And I'll continue doing that. But Kim was super gracious, and I definitely want to have him back on so we can get into more subjects like this. He's got lots of amazing books out there. There's one called Simplicity Parenting. There's another one, I love this title, The Soul of Discipline. I mean, come on. Does it get any better than that? And he's got others. He's done many things, so I think you'll enjoy this podcast. As you hear this, I am in the air to Australia, and I thought it was fitting having Kim on being in Australia, and as I'm leaving on February 4th, 2020 to go to Australia, and I arrive on February 6th. Yes, it's a long trip, but good God, how does one entire day, February 5th, is now just in the ether? It's somehow we go through time zones and travel for so long. There's an entire day that is lost in this traveling. But we land on the 6th. I've got a little less than a week to sort of acclimate and chill, and then we start having our dates on, I believe, February 14th in the Sydney area, and we'll be moving down the country. So see all the details for the Australian tour at eastforest.org. Hit the tour tab, so eastforest.org/tour. You can follow along on social media, at East Forest on Instagram, at East Forest Music on Facebook and Twitter. And we'll continue to give you the details, but always the email list is the best way to know what's going on. We try to send geo-targeted emails if we're coming to your neck of the woods. And that's where we kind of let you know about everything, like the East Forest retreats, things like the podcasts, collaborations, free gifts, etc., etc. And thank you for giving this podcast a review. It makes a big difference. If you can go to if you're on Apple Podcasts, I think you scroll back to the where all the episodes are, go all the way to the bottom there, hit that 5 stars. You can do it right now while I'm gibbering and jabbering in your ears, and that will make a lot of help. Okay, we're going to get into this. This is Kim John Payne. Hi, Kim. Thanks so much for joining us again. I was wanting to ask you about step parenting because I know you have a book called Simplicity Parenting, and it relates to my situation. So I was hoping you could speak to that and give us some more information.
Yeah, with all the many ways and the new forms of family that we have today. Well, actually, we're tempted to think they're new, but for thousands of years, family has meant so many different kinds of things, with results of wars and famines and all kinds of disruption to family life. So our new forms of family, blended families, step families, and so on, we've gotten pretty good at that over a long time. I think it's more now. We're putting a little more thought into it, and it's a good thing too. One of the things that I've had the feedback from both my own work with parents, but also from all of our coaches and group leaders in the Simplicity Parenting movement. We have over 1,000 coaches all around the world. It's a very sort of grassroots movement. And so this is feedback that is quite cross-cultural all around the world, is that having children and having families have a simple and balanced life means that there's space for unexpected things, new things, bumps along the way, so that there is space for adaptability. So if a new relationship forms, like a stepdad or stepmom, um, a death, a divorce, a blended family, in whatever way a family changes, when we have a balanced life and we give children a childhood, then there's more room for that new impulse, that new way of being in a family to come into a child's vessel, to come into their cup, so to speak, because their cup is not full to overflowing. There's room. There's room in the family cup. There's room in the child's individual vessel. And in that way, it's beautiful when there is that kind of space. However, if a family are living life to the max, which is the new normal, actually, and many families are doing just that. My advice to parents when they're about to shift the family constellation in some way is to really pay attention to dialing it all back, to creating some space in the family, even if the shift is already happening or happened. If there's difficulties with it, it is really heartening, very heartwarming, actually, to see how much things can improve if we dial it back, bring children back to just being more playful, more relaxed, their nervous systems returning back to a relaxed state from being hypervigilant. Because if a child, because of the new normal of the too much, too soon, too sexy, too young, if they're living life in this supersized way, what happens is that many kids are living life with a rather inflamed nervous system. They're hypervigilant, nervous, jumpy. And if there's something new that comes into the family, as new as a stepdad, then that it's very hard for the amygdala, the primal brain, the fight or flight, freeze or flock, I would add, brain, to actually not take that new presence as a threat. Even though the stepmom or stepdad, the new relationship, is a lovely, kind, considerate person, anything new, it's one of the hallmarks of the highly stressed child, which is so normal these days, is that novelty is rejected. Newness is seen as threat. And so my advice to any family that's going through shifts and changes is, and there's newness about to happen, and it's not just with step parents. Of course, it could be a move, a moving town,
Right.
a job shift, in whatever it is. It's terribly important to bring a child back to the point where that newness is not going to be seen as a threat. And the lovely thing about that is that actually you don't have to do anything at all. In fact, you have my only suggestion is do less. It's and I know that sounds easy, do less, but it's easier than a whole bunch of other stuff.
Sure. One thing I witness with the 8-year-old in our family is that sometimes by encouraging less, there's this immediate state of boredom. And it's sort of like always asking, like, what do I do? What do I do? And the undercurrent of that I can see is sort of like wanting to get on a screen. And us having lots of limits around screen time. But nonetheless, it's like this overarching theme of desire. And I really wanted to ask you about that specifically and how we can create this space that you're talking about and in how we navigate a modern life where screens are everywhere, whether it's a TV in a restaurant that just completely transfixes him, or wanting the iPad time to like a truly like a drug. And of course, we see it in adults too, but in children, it seems to be a unique situation.
Yeah, there's actually two layers there. I'm so glad you asked about that, Krishna, because I'm a really big fan of boredom.
Mm-hmm.
I really enjoy children. I mean, if my children come to me, I have two children, and they say, "Daddy, we're bored. There's nothing to do." My response has always been, "Oh dear, that's it." That's it. Or something to do is just around the corner. When they were younger, that would be the response. But forgive me if I take us on a slight. Well, it's not really a detour, but
of course,
I was driving in the car up in actually your way, up in the Rocky Mountain region, and I heard this report on the news that said over 32% of all employment for millennials will be self-employed, unbenefited, project-based, or part-time. And this was back in 2015. So I took the data from 2005 to 2015 when I got home and got to the computer, and because all this information is available, to then 2025. And by 2025, which is not so far away, we'll break the barrier. It's about 55% of all employment will be self-employed. Now, the reason I mention this in terms of boredom is that anyone who's listening, who's been self-employed, if we consider the qualities it takes to be self-employed, I mean, masochism aside, right?
Yeah, I understand it myself. So I am self-employed.
Right, but do you see, if I was to ask you, if I may, what do you feel it takes to be self-employed? What are the qualities? What would you say they were?
It takes a form of discipline, and it takes a form of will, and it takes another dose of trust, because things go on ebbs and flows, and you have to start to then trust in things you can't control, and also how processes work. And you have to be able to be someone who's self-motivated, which I am, and just having that will to do it. Like I think I often joke that most of my energy in life has been avoiding a 9 to 5, and even as a child, I hated being told what to do. I mean, on the very first day of first grade, I remember, I've said this before on the podcast, but I walked in first day. I remember the memory. I looked around, I saw the desks and the whole setup, and I announced to the class, I said, "No, thank you. This isn't for me." And I left. And I just never liked those structures. And so I think for some people, it's a bit embedded in their core personality.
Yeah, and I so appreciate that, because the if you take that kind of will that you mentioned, that kind of self-discipline, obviously creativity, and for me, a really big part of self-employment is grit. It's just allowing oneself to make a mistake, having that be okay, problem solving, and then getting back into it, trying again. Now, all that, of course, being innovative, being adaptable. A lot of self-employment is adaptable. Now, if we consider that 50+% and rising of our children that are going out into the world are going to need those kind of qualities: innovativeness, adaptability, will, grit, individuality, then where do they learn that? And one of the primary places they learn that is through dealing with boredom. Because out of boredom comes creativity. Like if your kids come to you and say they're bored, then 20 minutes later, and by the way, for those 20 minutes, separate them because they go at each other. But but intense creativity breaks out. if they're younger ones, the cardboard box gets made into a rocket. If they're older ones, then maybe they're inventing a new board game, or they're out in the yard. For an 8 or 9-year-old boy, they're in the yard, and maybe they've got this wild idea of a tree fort that is at least 40 foot off the ground, and all kinds of stuff that they're dreaming up. Or maybe they're just laying in the branch of the tree, just dreaming, just feeling the tree on their abdomen, just laying like a sloth on the tree, or looking up at the clouds. That's, for me, a lot of the qualities that are required, that are going to be required in the future, come out of letting children be bored, then resisting putting the iPad in front of them, which is almost the opposite to creativity. Steve Jobs didn't have screens in his home. You know that? He just
did not.
Just packaged it up in minimalistic packaging and sold it to us poor schmucks. But when he was asked why for so long he had a very minimal screen scene in his home for children, his answer, as it was relayed, was, why would I want them to watch someone else's creativity? You see, we forget that screens, it's not our children's creativity. For the most part, it's someone else's creativity. And yet our children are going into the world where they're going to need to be self-motivated, as you mentioned, Krishna, and they're going to have to be self-generating. So having them have real play, real problems to solve that play brings, needs space and time. And that's largely my concern about screens, because I'm not anti-screen. You and I are communicating via a screen right now, and your community are listening in via screens. They serve a purpose, and a great purpose, as a tool. I'm not anti-screen at all. My concern about screens is more the time they take, and it's more about connection. And if I may just sort of clarify that, it's way back in 2011, the Kaiser Family Foundation study released the data that the average American 12-year-old is exposed to about 7.5 hours of screens a day. That's now, in 2016, with a follow-up study, risen to about 9.25 hours.
Wow.
So I know, so the New York Times wrote an article saying, if your child's awake, they're on a screen. Now, if our kids aren't on the screen for 4, 5, 6, 7 hours a day, then hooray, good for us, because we've made a decision, because we're way below the national average. But it's still, I think of in essence, what are we're giving our children a lot of issues to solve. Unfortunately, there's a lot they're going to have to be ingenious with. They're going to have to collaborate. They're going to have to be creative to solve a lot of the problems that these last generations of adults have created, and not least of all the planet and the crisis we face, and not just the crisis we face without, but the crisis we face within. And for me, there are like 4 concentric circles, like that penny in a pond, when you drop a penny in a pond and you see these circles. But I'll start from the outside, actually, and work in very briefly. As many of us know, that it's hugely important that a child has connection to nature and the natural world.
Right.
And the next circle in is I also find it's so important that a child has connection to friends and to playing with friends, or playing alone, but not friending friends, real friends. And then the next circle in, like a sort of Russian doll nesting, going in and in, the next circle in is connection to family, extended family, dear family friends, but that core, that family, which is like a safe harbor out of which our children will launch into the world. And then at the core of it all is a connection to self, to an emerging sense of, for a child, as they grow into their tweens and into their teens and into the young adulthood, of an ethical, moral, I know who I am. I have my own unique individual values. Now, all those connections take time. Every single one of them take time. And yet, if a child is on a screen for 1, 2, 3, 4 hours a day, that's time when they're not making those connections. They're being anesthetized and they're moving around those connections. One quick example. I have an 18 and a 20-year-old daughter. Now, last year, it was actually it was just a little bit of an accident by accident that one daughter was going on an exchange to Germany, and one daughter was going off and starting her big adventures and travels around the world, and really, many different countries around the world. That was the 20-year-old, and they just happened to be flying out of our local airport at the same time. Now, my younger daughter was quite inexperienced at airports. So my older daughter, who'd traveled a little bit, said, "You come with me." And so we're down there, myself and Catherine, my wife, are watching these two beautiful girls go through security. And my older daughter sort of, like that classic first child thing, showing her how to do it and taking off her shoes. And my younger daughter looked back and smiled because she didn't want to wear shoes in the first place. But anyway, through they went. And they got through, and they both got their backpacks on their back. Now my older daughter is taking the younger one down to the gate to explain all that to her. Mm-hmm. And I see them turn the corner, and I catch a glimpse, Krishna, of them holding hands. And it was all, in that moment, it was all worth it. It was all worth it. It was worth not having screens. If a child is introduced to screens at around about the age of 6, the average American child, halving the data that the Kaiser Family Foundation give, will watch over 15,000 hours of screens before the age of 18. That's half the national average, 15,000 hours. Now, do I want my kids to have 15,000 hours of connectedness to each other, to us, to nature, to themselves? Or do I want 15,000 hours connected to a screen?
Sure.
That's the issue for me about screens. It's not about the neurological developmental delay they cause, because they do. It's not so much about all that other stuff, the social emotional impairment they cause, because they do. It's about those two girls turning a corner holding hands, because that happened because of boredom. And that happened because of giving children a space. I'm not a perfect parent by any means, but in that moment when I saw them working things out together, my mind went back to all the myriad things that they did as little children together, working things out, because they didn't have screens in their life. So that's a long answer, but it was a really good question. So it was your...
Yes, I appreciate that answer. And it is a very big subject, I know. And let me just kind of continue down this path, but take a little turn. I've heard a lot of people say parenting is all negotiation. And I've witnessed that sometimes a lot of parenting is done through rewards. And let's bring back the screen or the iPad again. It's sort of like this: if there is an addiction, the child has a desire to constantly return to it. So there's often like this even if there's boundaries around it, there's a request, like that's what I want to do. And so you're in this position of sort of drawing those boundaries. What comes up for you when I say parenting is about negotiation, and how do you use or not use rewards as part of parenting?
Yeah, in another book I wrote about discipline called The Soul of Discipline, I actually thought a lot about that. So it's a great question, but I'll try and keep my answer a little briefer this time. That I think the choices that children get, and our the way we are with our kids, the gesture we have with our kids has to change over the years. So I feel we go through a phase that I call, when children are little, I think of it as the governor, where we're the benevolent, kind, but firm dictator of our family state. And it's a little state. I mean, it's Rhode Island or something, but it's the family state where we're really in charge, where the children, because they're so little, they need to feel safe, they need to feel secure, they need to feel trust. And if we give them too many choices and allow them to negotiate with us, the subtext of that message is no one is in charge.
Mm-hmm.
And for a little child to feel no one is in charge, a couple of things happen. And it happens over time, and no one means it. But the first thing is that they feel unsafe and stressed.
Mm-hmm.
The second thing is, if there's a leadership vacuum in a family, the children feel that no one's in charge, no one's leading, then they will step into it, slightly out of desperation. And then you have a child that is really going to struggle, really struggle in family life. And that's a very, very difficult situation in families. And I work with countless numbers of families. For a child through sort of 6, 7, 8, 9 years old, I think it's terribly important that kind, warm, but firmly they understand that we as adults are in that authoritative position. I don't mean authoritarian by any means and cold and harsh, but I do mean warmly and firmly the children have that secure knowledge that we are directing them and we are directing our lives, and that they don't need to make decisions way beyond their developmental ability to make them. And when they know that, a lot of sibling issues start to calm down, because if there's more than one child and they get the feeling there's a leadership vacuum, and we start parenting as if we're the children's peers and friends and buddies, then what will happen is the kids will joust as to who's in charge. And they'll fight and very tenaciously. But when an adult can step back into that authoritative place, it's really beautiful to see how the children just stand down, or their arguments are way more malleable and easier to work through, because they have that sense of security that authentic leadership brings. But when they're about 10, 9, 10, 11, 12, that's the phase I call the gardener. And that gardener phase, like anyone who has a little garden or a commercial garden, we all know that we have to listen and watch very carefully. We have to watch the skies. We have to listen in. We have to be really tuned in. And I think it's terribly important to tune in to kids this age, listen to them, and really ask them, what's your plan? Tell me your plan, but tell me respectfully, number one. Tell me at the right time, number two. And number three, tell me so that you show that you're a part of a family team. In other words, with consideration for others. And over and over and over, if we say to kids, is that considering, your brother's got to get to soccer practice. So if you want to do that, how's that going to work out? Let's try and figure that one out. So that because this is establishing a platform for the teenage years. And if we have a child go into the teenage years, knowing a little bit about respect, knowing a little bit about timing, a little bit about consideration for family, that's going to be a whole lot happier teenage years. So when kids are up to about the age of 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, that's what I call the gardener phase. Mm-hmm. And then finally, there's the guide phase, about 14, 15, around about then through to 18, 19, 20. I think we're in a guiding role. I'm in that role with my kids now, where, teenagers can be spectacularly disinterested in our opinions, really, but they're very, very interested in their direction in life. And so the message for a teenager is, I want to help you get where you're going. I want to help you do what you want to do. I'm going to help, and I'm going to guide. I'm going to come alongside you and help you. And let's figure out how we can make that happen. But a good guide knows the terrain, and if there's just straight up danger in that path, a good guide will step in and say, that's not a good way to go. Let's try another way here.
Mm-hmm.
And so in terms of all being negotiation, I would say actually the negotiating time is more in the latter teens. Only as a society, we've tried to pack 18, 19 years of development into the first 4 or 5 years. So we've brought what I think of as the right gesture, that of negotiation, collaboration for a teenager, and we've brought that into the earlier years. And that's the problem. I see that as a problem, because then kids don't know who's in charge, and it leads to a feeling of insecurity. And a lot of the tremendous rise of nervousness and anxiousness with children now is partly a result of that. Now, perhaps just to round off with that thought, I hear a lot about having a child-centered home, and I get it. I get that we want to really, really be kind and loving to our kids. But having a child-centered home is just way too much responsibility to give a child. To be honest with you, Krishna, I don't believe in child-centered homes. I believe in value-centered homes. And when there are clarified values within a family, that's a beautiful well we can all come to and be refreshed from. But child-centered, that basically sets children up to be petty tyrants. And that's my concern.
Yeah, I know you're short on time, but that makes me think about when you get a feeling of entitlement. And I think a lot of, quote, woke parents, the last thing they want is to raise a child that has this sort of entitlement of like, well, this is what I get. This is the things I have, when they already have so much. And I know that they're probably wanting to engender feelings of gratitude and this idea of what it means to be in service, or the selflessness, and how that actually benefits our psyche and our being and our lives and our community. And I could see how having a value-centered home, that makes more sense to me, as one that you could really stand behind, as opposed that's child-centric. One serves the other, where the other maybe doesn't serve the larger value, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's we all want to, as you say, raise children in a spirit of gratitude, not with a false sense of entitlement. And that spirit of gratitude is just one of those values that I'd probably be fair to say most parents hold very dear. Gratitude is something that some parents even have, like a gratitude a day at the dinner table. I know we for years. But that's what I mean by strengthening values. Caring for your brother or sister, really genuine care is another one. In our family, we really welcomed a big part of our values were welcoming differing perspectives and not seeing them as opposing opinions. So that if the children or the grown-ups had differing perspectives about something, it was welcomed and it was okay. It's amazing how many sibling fights that prevents. But much more importantly than that, it brings about a quality of giving another person the space that they need to actually express and have their perspective. A big value in our family was also living with mistakes and being okay when we got things wrong.
Sure.
And allowing someone the space to put it right. So these are just examples of values. We've all got different ones, but they're the ones. The reason they're so important is not just that they're big philosophical things. If a child comes home from school and calls their sibling a really unkind name, and they sort of say something like, "Oh, you're such a loser," it's just something spills out of them. right there, there's a value clarification moment. It's in the United States, we often say don't sweat the small stuff, but with parenting, it's sweat the small stuff without becoming neurotic about it. If it's contra to a value that a family has, personally, I think it's stop the world. That comment's not okay in our family. And to say to a child, you know what, you hardly ever speak like that. Yesterday you just helped me bring all those groceries in and I didn't even ask you. You're a kind boy and I know it, but something must be up because that was harsh. And in our family, it's not okay. So we're going to figure out what's going on. That kind of gesture.
Well, really that mirrors, parenting is a mirror of sort of how we're parenting ourselves in our own minds. And so these are all like tools we can use with the child inside, the voice inside, with our own values and like our own ways of minimalism and the power of less and all the things you're talking about. And that's one of the other reasons I'm really interested in these things, because I know it's about my own growth and sort of our endless childhood. But I'd love to get into more, but am I correct that you're running out of time here?
Yeah. I'm terribly sorry I am, but maybe we can pick up the conversation at another time. I'd be delighted to speak to you.
Yeah, I really love just the honesty and the nuance you're bringing to this and your experience. But how can people dig more into your world?
Well, it's just that normal way of the simplicityparenting.com website. Like you, there's also I have a podcast, Krishna. It's called Simplicity Parenting on iTunes, I think it's. We also have courses where we train simplicity parenting group leaders. And it's a simple little course. Well, it'd be ironic if it was complicated. But that's perhaps my greatest joy, is all the grassroots gatherings. Like as we're talking now, somewhere in the world, there'll be someone sitting with a group of 10 or 15 parents, all helping each other give children a childhood. And so if anyone is at all interested in that approach and being a group leader, they can contact us right from the website. Be thrilled to hear from you.
Well, thank you so much for giving us your time, and I really enjoyed getting this chance to connect.
Oh, pleasure's mine. Many blessings on your work, Krishna, and everyone who's listening in.
Thank you. Well, I will we'll update you with links and so forth, but I'll let you go because I know you gotta run.
Okay, bye-bye for now then.
Thank you so much. Well, again, thank you, Kim, for gracing us with your unbelievable grace. Is that man not so graceful? I can't wait to talk to him again just because I feel calmer when I'm talking to him and listening to his voice. I love that. Check out his books, check out his work. This song that you are hearing in the background is called Slowly But Forward. It's featuring Thatcher Schmid on the viola violin. This is something I did many, many years ago. Thatcher's someone who would come over when I lived in Portland, and we'd just sort of do some improvisations. Some of them became songs. This one is off the album Music Meditations, which is an ancient album of mine. Thatcher came over a couple years back on another occasion to record, and that song became I Am Loving Awareness. And that was just an improvisation he and I did with me on piano, him in the other room on viola and violin, playing 2 tracks of him. And that was a really special sort of ambient song that I continued to work on and then became I Am Loving Awareness with Krishna Das. So Thatcher's a great guy. You can check out his work. He lives in Portland, Oregon. For all you producers out there, he's an extremely unique player if you want to hire him. So hope to see you on this tour. I will continue front-loading and releasing podcasts weekly as this tour is going on because I'm that kind of guy. And just really looking forward to, as the spring emerges, we'll be in the summer down there, but as I return to the U.S., springtime will be coming forth. We'll be playing at the Treefort Music Fest. Very excited about those dates in late March. And then there's going to be more announced around the U.S. and lots of other stuff. So you guys keep walking your walk. Don't take any shit. But if you do it with grace.